please help me welcome our panelists, Bob Rolls, former Deputy Chief Constable of Vancouver Police Department. Cash Heed, former Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General. Mike Larson of Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and he's chair of their criminology department. And many of you may remember Fraser McRae. He's the former Assistant Commissioner and Officer in charge of the Surrey RCMP. Bob, you may begin your remarks.
Thank you very much, Anita. First off, I have to say that I am a proud citizen of Surrey, so I'm interested in this professionally, but it's also very important to me personally. I'll just give you a really brief background on me. I served with the Vancouver Police Department for 33 years, retiring as Deputy Chief Constable in 2010. I've continued to stay active in public safety since then, sitting on a number of boards, including the Judicial Council of British Columbia and ECOM 9/11, where I had the great pleasure of working with Fraser. I also have done a number of policing reviews. The most recent was a review of police training in British Columbia, municipal police training, completed last year. And in 2015, I did a report on behalf of Richmond Municipal Council, and that was in partnership with retired Deputy Commissioner Peter German, and that was on the cost of transitioning from their RCMP model to municipal policing model. And what I'm going to be focusing my comments on is the experience in Richmond and how it applies to what's the current discussion that's taking place in Surrey. I should say that the Richmond looking at moving to a municipal model, that discussion actually took place over a number of years. The first study was in 2007. That was followed by a study in 2012, and that was by the RCMP called the RCMP Advantage. There was also input from some other studies, including input from Vancouver at that time. In 2013, there was a study. This one was done by Dr. Kurt Griffiths and Dr. Nahani Pollard, and then our review in 2015. When you look at the drivers for this discussion that took place in Richmond, you see a lot of the same drivers that currently influence the discussion here in Surrey. One of the ones was the governance model, and there was some general dissatisfaction with the governance model with the Richmond RCMP, with the Richmond RCMP being governed thousands of miles away, and the participation of Richmond being largely on a public safety committee. They were very interested in the municipal model, in which there is a police board with a finance committee, a human resources committee, and also a governance committee. A big one was financial control. There was a concern with decisions being made in Ottawa that impacted the Richmond budget without any input from Richmond Council. There was also a concern around a lack of accountability and transparency in relation to budget expenditures. Two things that have to be an important topic when you're looking at different types of policing models that they were very interested in, and whether the municipal model would serve better was in terms of tailoring policing to community needs, and also in terms of service delivery and staffing. The last one that was a big one in Richmond was turnover in seniority, and they had a concern that they had a very junior police force, that there was a lot of turnover, which ultimately means that the police officers on the street didn't have the experience perhaps that would be desirable, and also that they didn't have deep roots in the community. So that's unlike the municipal policing model, where you get a place like Delta where police officers will work virtually their entire career. The reason that Peter and I were asked to come in and do this review, though, had nothing to do with the pros and cons of RCMP model against municipal model. The reason we were asked to come in and do the review was because there was a huge discrepancy in the cost projections between these various research projects. So on the one hand, the 2013 study had it that it could be done for as little as $16 million, whereas the city did their own calculations and they determined that it would be more like $30 million. So council was looking for something definitive that they could take to the public, and they could use that to make the decision. So that was what we did. In order to actually determine that cost, what we had to do was we actually had to build a transition model and then cost it out. We had the benefit of all the studies that have preceded us, plus we had all the experience drawn from both RCMP and a municipal policing background. So we built that model on a 2-year time frame, exactly the same 2 years as talked about in Surrey, and then we worked with city staff to cost it out. And at the end of the day, we determined that it would be about $19,600,000, just over that, and presented that to council. The next part of their process was in 2016, beginning of 2016, from January to April, they went out and they did a public consultation. And I would say that public consultation was entirely focused on whether the citizens of Richmond were interested in investing X amount of dollars to move from the RCMP to municipal model. And one of the things I did hear is I heard a lot of Richmond staff suggesting that the cost could be as high as $30 million and more. So on that basis, and not on the basis of pros and cons, the two models, but on the basis of cost alone, the decision in Richmond was not to go ahead. When I look at Surrey, what I actually see is I see a lot of the same drivers that are talked about. I think that governance and financial control and accountability are certainly equally important in the Surrey discussion. Tailoring policing to community needs and service delivery and staffing have to be very important parts of a discussion when you're looking at different policing models. Turnover and seniority, the big one in Richmond, does not seem to be as much of an issue in Surrey. From what I understand, that there's a lot of very senior members in Surrey and a lot of members that are deeply entrenched in the community. I would still say it's not similar to a municipal model, though, where in Delta, again, using that example, where police officers spend their entire time in one career. The one that I hear a lot of discussion about in Surrey that did not come up in Richmond is the whole one around public safety and gang violence, and this seems to be a main driver here. In terms of our study and how it might apply to the study we did in Richmond and how it would apply to Surrey, I believe that our study was completely applicable. One of the big questions that I hear a lot of talk about is, can this be achieved? And there's never been a transition of this scale before, and that's true. Probably the closest thing is the creation of the transit police, which was actually creating a brand new police force from scratch. But in terms of transitioning over, there's not another example. I can only say that based on our research, that I am confident in saying that it can be achieved, that it's completely achievable. It's all about having a very comprehensive and good plan, and it's all about having the right resources dedicated to make that plan happen. Really what the difference is about when you're looking between Richmond and Surrey, it's all about scale. And in the case of Richmond, they had 190 police officers, and I think Surrey's just over 850, so that's a sizable difference. But in terms of the other parts, building a transition team, developing a plan and timelines, securing facilities and other assets, including vehicles, police equipment, and computers, hiring a chief and executive, and phasing in other staff. They're the same. It doesn't matter whether it's Richmond or Surrey. The difference is the hiring the 850 members, and that is a very large task. And I would think that if that's the path that we're going down, I think that would have to be something that would start very early on. I think you'll find that a lot of members will transition from the RCMP, and that there'd be a lot of interest as well from other municipal police departments, including Vancouver. So I think it's a big challenge. I guess the other part that I'd say doing that sort of thing, and something we built into the Richmond model, was to have a contingency in the case that you could not do it within the 2-year time frame. One of the big things I hear a lot of speculation around is the cost of a municipal policing model. A lot of speculation that the cost could skyrocket. I just want to say that I completely disagree with that. The reality is, when you start a brand new police department, you've got an opportunity to build a police department based on the best and most efficient practices available. You can look at all the other policing services, and you can grab different elements that you think will work better in Surrey. The other thing is, I know that a lot of the time when people talk about how expensive it would be, they look at the Vancouver model and say, well, look at Vancouver with all 2-member cars and how expensive that would be. Well, just to set the record straight, like Vancouver, the contract is actually 60% 2-member cars and 40% 1-member cars. So that's a contractual requirement. Vancouver often chooses to deploy more than 60%, but that's something you would bargain and something you would have flexibility around. And I think when you get in that discussion as well, you have to also consider the inefficiencies of 1-member cars. And as a citizen of Surrey, I can't tell you how many times I see 2, 3, and 4 1-member cars turn up at a call where in Vancouver that would be 1 car or 2 cars. And I just ask you to imagine the inefficiencies associated with all those extra vehicles and all that additional overhead. Another one that I think is an interesting one is when I look at the Surrey model, again, when you're costing these things out, you have to look at shifting models. And Surrey has a grossly inefficient shifting model. In Vancouver, what they have is the shifting is very closely tied with call load. In Surrey, you've got 12-hour shifts, so you've essentially got the same number of members working on a Sunday morning that you do on a Friday night. So in Vancouver, on a Friday night, you actually have 3 shifts overlapping. On a Sunday morning, you have 1 shift working. So that creates some gross inefficiencies. That's just one of the opportunities where you can have a much more efficient police force. Another thing is when you're looking at policing, there's an opportunity for a tiered response, and that's something some other police departments are doing. So instead of having police officers go out and do some of the jobs like picking up property and so forth, civilians are used for that. And so there are some significant savings there. So anyway, I think I'm in my 10 minutes. So anyway, I'll end my comments there. Thank you.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here this morning. Nobody's laughing yet. Well, it's a serious matter. So let me just tell you a little story. It's a true story, too. But I've just changed the names a bit. Mr. Gill and his wife were about to go to bed. They live here in Surrey, a nice area of Surrey. And they look out, and Mr. Gill looks out in the back, and he sees a light on in the garage. And he says to Mrs. Gill, "Did you leave the light on in the garage?" And she says, "No, I turned it off." And he looks out and he sees 2 people rummaging through all of his stuff in his garage. He says, "Oh my God, oh my God." Now these people have lived here for 40 years, have never called the police for anything. So he calls 911. He says, 2 people just broke into my garage. They're in my garage now, and they're rummaging through. So the dispatcher says to him, "Are they coming near your house? Are they trying to break in your house?" He says, "No, they've broken into my garage, and I think they're stealing my stuff." She says, "Mr. Gill, we're really busy this evening. We've got so many priority calls. As soon as I get a car free, I will send the car to you." He waits, and he keeps an eye on these people. 15 minutes later, the police still not arrived. They're still in the garage. So he phones back, and he says, "It's Mr. Gill again." She says, "I told you we're very, very busy tonight. We don't have members available to send." He hangs up the phone. He waits 2 minutes. He phones back. She said, "Mr. Gill, what can I do?" "Don't bother sending anyone. I just shot them." Oh my God. Lights and sirens coming from all over the place. ERT shows up, dog teams show up, the sergeant shows up. They rush in and they catch these 2 guys that broke into the garage. Sergeant turns to Mr. Gill and he says, "I thought you said you shot him." He says, "I thought you said you were busy." Anyhow, let's get to a bit of a serious part here. My colleague, former colleague Bob Rolls, still a good friend of mine. And I used to teach at the university, not Kwantlen though, but professor there, and Fraser. Fraser and I have known one another for years. He said we met in North Van. I still don't remember, unless I was lifting more weights than him at that time. But we've got a serious matter here, and Bob has really drilled in to some of the roadblocks that we hear, that people that are resisting this policy change here in Surrey. And I thank you for that. He's got a wealth of knowledge and experience in this particular area. His commands in Vancouver certainly looked at that part of it. And I'm sure Mike will give you a bit of an academic, and Fraser some of his own experiences, which have been plentiful, not only in Surrey, but with the RCMP. Now, if we look at, and I just want to start because Bob mentioned expense. We've heard this massive expense that it will be to transition to an independent municipal police agency in Surrey. And I think we really have to look at how much it's actually going to cost. Because I'm a constituent in Richmond. I've lived in Richmond for over 50 years, and I was kind of disappointed when Richmond threw out some of the number costs for transitioning to an independent municipal, and I really challenge those numbers. So we want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples when we talk about cost, because that is going to be the prime factor used by people that are opposed to any change here in Surrey is going to be the cost. They're going to say your taxes are going to go up because of this. So be very, very wary of that, and I get a full explanation of what those costs will be. Because if there's a will, there's certainly a way to transition and reform policing, not only in Surrey but elsewhere in the Lower Mainland. Now, I've been an advocate for police reform for over 15 years, and many of you have heard me talk about the need for a regional, a unified type police service in Metro Vancouver and the capital region in Victoria. I'm still an advocate of that, but realistically that will not happen because your provincial government will have to get involved in order for that to take place. That's where, in my opinion, you would have, and I want you to remember this, because at the end of the day you need to walk away remembering this and wanting this. You need to have the most effective, efficient, and accountable police service for the citizens of Surrey. What that uniform color looks like remains to be seen. There are two proposals at the table. I don't think you're going to see that third proposal of a regional police service unless government forces that. That is, your provincial government forces that, because you will never get the 20-some-odd mayors coming together and agreeing to that. And if you look at the responsibility of policing under the Constitution Act in Canada, the police authority is delegated to the provinces. Here in British Columbia, we've delegated that authority down to the municipal governments through the BC Police Act. But at the end of the day, if we're going to make any changes here in Surrey, the government has to approve that. The Solicitor General, Cabinet, they have to make that decision at the end of the day. So the best plan that you could put forward, which would deal with all of the issues, could be thwarted by the provincial government. So you'd be very, very wary of that. At the end of the day, it is the right thing to do to create your most effective, efficient, and accountable police model. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, like many things right now, decisions are made for political reasons, not the best reasons. Now, you wanted me, Anita wanted me to cover a few issues in my part of it. And I'm just going to quickly go through this because I think what's important is the engagement from the community, the engagement of what you want to know about. And I think that's missing because the communication, this is great for the Surrey Board of Trade to bring this forum together. We need several more of these so the community really understands what they are getting into. So as I mentioned, the province needs to be convinced. The Solicitor General, Farnsworth, needs to be convinced. And I got to tell you, some of the comments I've heard from him are not encouraging for any transition of a police service here in Surrey, but that remains to be seen at the end of the day. Gang violence, Bob touched a bit on that. I'll tell you, this past election was the first election that I can remember in several years where the issue of crime was at the forefront. I think it should be at the forefront all the time. I may be biased simply because I spent over 31 years in policing, but I tell you, it needs to be at the forefront. So when you talk about gang issues, when you talk about violent crime, yes, there has been a reduction in crime here in Surrey. However, when you look at the cycle of crime and you go back, 3-5 years, you can see there was continual increases in crime. And this past year, we've had a reduction. Let's hope we continue to reduce here in Surrey. However, when you look at a couple of factors, and probably the most reportable incident of crime is homicides. When you had an increase, you need to be aware of it. Yes, I believe if you can bring back local governance to Surrey, and that's another part that we need to discuss, you would have more effective programs and being able to put those effective programs in place. And I'm going to give you one example, is Bar Watch in Surrey. Bob, you'll recall this. Fraser, you'll recall this Bar Watch because 12 years ago, Curtis Robinson, a young sergeant out of Vancouver, initiated Bar Watch. and that kind of went into the firearms interdiction team, which went into the integrated gang task force. When I was a chief in West Van, I put it in 2 months. I was just having a conversation with Jim Sessford the other day. He brought it in less time than that in Delta. We brought that proposal to the RCMP 12 years ago. Curtis, I just had a phone call with him, was telling me that he, on his own time, volunteered to bring in Bar Watch program. You know what? It took 12 years before you brought it in here in Surrey. And that was one where we're saying, you know, you gangbangers, you frequenting our restaurants, our lounges, our bars, you're not welcome here. So that's one area, and I think it's probably the most profound example of how long it took to bring in a particular effective program. So at the end of the day, I can't say with certainty changing your color of your police uniform is going to deal with these issues, but I can tell you right now, there is no other time where you're going to be able to have a white sheet of paper and create your own police service. This is the opportunity you have at this particular time. When you talk about costs, when you talk about what the members should do, when you talk about shifting models, when you talk about how we're going to deploy our members, here's the opportunity for change, because you need to make sure that you are going to have a police service that is outcome-based, not process-driven. And I'm getting the sign here that my time's up, but this is the important part of it, is being outcome-based. If your outcome is to reduce gang violence, absolutely, there are programs you have to put in place, and there's people you have to hold accountable, because I can tell you right now, the accountability factor is crucial for any change in policing here in Surrey. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I get the privilege of perhaps raising a couple of issues that haven't come up yet, and perhaps posing a couple of questions. I don't have as clear and straightforward a sense of exactly what I want to see in terms of a police organization for Surrey, but I do agree that this is an interesting opportunity with a comparatively blank page to see where we want to go. So now's the time for this kind of discussion. Just by way of introduction, so I'm a instructor at the at KPU in the criminology department, but my other hat is actually I'm the president of the BC Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. And so I spend most of my time looking at issues around civil liberties, privacy, and accountability. As you can imagine, it's been a busy few years with these issues. But I wanted to speak about accountability as kind of the main thrust of my concern around this whole process. I think that you can't have a transparent and accountable police organization in a city the size of Surrey unless the process through which you design and create it and bring it into fruition is also transparent and accountable. And I think that there's been some serious deficiencies in that regard. Changing a police department in a city of this size is no small task. And it requires a great degree of discussion, great degree of input from groups like yourselves, but also, I think, from many of the communities that are susceptible and more likely to be targeted by intensive policing. And I want to see that conversation. I want to see a lot of people at the table, and I want to see a plan in terms of what exactly we're looking for. So my first point, I think, is that we need a much more transparent process. I know there are a lot of ideas and a lot of conversations taking place, and I'm well aware that there are design work going on behind the scenes in terms of what a police force for Surrey would look like. But I think that there's a lot we could do to make that more public. The idea of changing the model of policing for Surrey has been positioned as a means to an end. A variety of ends, right? It means to the end of a greater capacity for local governance, a more accountable police department, perhaps a more effective and efficient police department. But the connection between what we're designing and what we're looking to achieve hasn't really been clearly specified to my satisfaction. I think if we were looking to build something like a bridge across the Fraser, we would require a more clear and thorough costing explanation, accounting of exactly what our results are supposed to be than we've seen for a police department so far. So there's much more room for transparency. I also want to speak about the issue of what kinds of crime are driving the conversation around policing in Surrey. So we've had a couple of remarks this morning about about gangs and the importance of dealing with gang violence, and there is no doubt that there is a serious concern in Surrey around gang violence, and I certainly won't minimize that. The issue, of course, is that gang violence is high visibility, high seriousness, but not representative of the majority of the work that a new municipal police department in Surrey would be doing, right? Gangs are a part of the issue and an important part, but certainly don't represent the majority of police work. And I don't think you can design a municipal police department specifically around a particular problem like gangs. So what I want to see is a much more fulsome discussion about what exactly we're looking to achieve in terms of public safety in Surrey, and whether and to what extent that is best achievable through redesigning a police organization alone, or whether public safety is something that requires a much more comprehensive overhaul in a city like Surrey. And just to name a few issues, if you take a look, and you can drill down into a lot of the statistics on this, much of it's publicly available. If you take a look at what's driving things like crime, arrests, and public safety concerns in Surrey, on the one hand, you certainly have a gang problem, which is a problem throughout BC and the Lower Mainland, but you also have serious problems around housing and housing affordability, mental health, and addiction. And this is actually making up the bulk of the cases that are moving through BC's courts, certainly the Surrey court, busiest in the province, and many would say in the country. These issues have to be front and center in the conversation about a renewed public safety model for Surrey. I know it's important. I know there's a great degree of interest in the issue of gangs, and again, that has to be part of the conversation. But we shouldn't mistake ourselves into thinking that you can design a police department as a gang department and achieve broader public safety goals. And then just to move to a close here, and there's so much more we could say about this, I do think this is an opportunity. There's never been a situation, in my experience, or in the experience of any of my co-panelists, where a city the size of Surrey has declared that, look, we're going to revamp policing. And we have a lot of opportunities in terms of deciding what that's going to look like. So I want us to just be cognizant that across Canada, police reform is also a conversation, indeed around the world. Surrey just has the opportunity to design something new, but police reform is a major public policy issue in a city like Toronto, certainly up for discussion in Vancouver. So we don't have to invent things necessarily from ground up. We can take a look at some of the debates that are already driving this. So one is a much more representative police department, a much more accountable police department, and one that's closely linked to community priorities and needs, one that is not regarded as being an external imposition on a community, but really part of a community, if that's achievable. That's something that has to be designed into a police department from the outset. There are a lot of concerns in Canada around police training and resources available for police training. If you're going to have a police department in Surrey that's a municipal department, of course you have to get your officers from somewhere. Many of them will transition from other police organizations, including, I would suspect, the RCMP for a bulk of the members. But you need to develop an institutional culture, and you need to train people so that they're in a position to deliver the services that the community requires, and we need to talk about what that's going to look like. What kind of police department do we want to have, and how do we want them to act in Surrey? And concerns that have been arisen in other jurisdictions across Canada have been things like training around de-escalation, training around mental health issues, and again, these, to my mind, are really salient public policy issues, and if you're going to have a conversation about redesigning police, they're not as high visibility and newsworthy as conversations about gang violence, but they're certainly pertinent to designing a police organization. So I look forward to those conversations. My final remark is that I'm a bit concerned about the momentum that I see with this. So there's opportunity, but there is a sense that things are moving actually fairly quickly with a very ambitious, some would say unrealistic timeline. Of 2 years to bring in a new police organization in Surrey. It's hard to have these kinds of foundational conversations in that time frame. So I'm hoping that everyone here can call for a more transparent and consultative process from the city to involve as many people as possible in that conversation. Thank you.
Good morning. Nice to see some familiar faces out there. Anita and the Surrey Board of Trade, there you are. I'd like thank you for hosting this important dialogue. I'd like to acknowledge the other panel members. And Cash, I think the reason why you didn't remember me is that I did lift more than you that day. I should start by saying that
RCMP comment.
I'm not here speaking for the RCMP. Obviously, I have a bias. I spent almost 36 years with the RCMP. But I don't speak on their behalf. I'm just an old retired guy that might have some perspective on this issue. I'll qualify my comments by stating that I have the greatest respect for municipal police departments and their ability and commitment to provide quality service. Throughout my service in the RCMP, I've worked shoulder to shoulder with them, both at the operational level and at the executive level. There's no question that a municipal police department would serve the city of Surrey and its citizens very well. This shouldn't be, nor is it, about us versus them. I particularly appreciated your comments, Mike, about the broader discussion, and yours as well, Cash, not that I didn't appreciate yours too, Bob, but about the broader discussion that is required about policing, because policing does not exist as an island unto itself within a single community. This discussion today is about where Surrey is at this particular place in time and the practicality, value, and outcomes, and certainly costs associated with Surrey transitioning from the RCMP to a municipal police service. As has been described by Mike, what is being proposed is not a simple patch over wherein one municipal department joins with another municipal department to be under one command structure and one operating budget and one operational strategy, such as Vancouver and West Vancouver if they got together. This is a completely different proposition, starting a brand new police service that replaces the incumbent police agency. And it's complicated here in Surrey, obviously by the size and scope of the transition, size of the community, and all without impacting public safety. Public safety and community safety is a complex subject. Everyone understands at the intellectual and philosophical level that the safety and livability of your community depends on multiple factors. These include, but are not limited to, demographic, societal circumstance, social service infrastructure and capacity, public health, education, youth programs, the criminal justice system, oh yes, and police have a role to play as well. I'll give you just a few examples that illustrate the complexity of issues facing communities today. The current opioid crisis, homelessness, mental health issues. Vancouver did a fantastic report on the impact of mental health issues on policing in their community, in their city. Bullying, the proliferation of gangs. All of these examples, we understand, require complex, sustainable, and coordinated, comprehensive, multi-stakeholder strategies to realize positive outcomes. There are no simple solutions such as just do this, or we should ban handguns in the city of Surrey, or we should change our police force. These simplistic solutions and inclination to focus on the shiny object does not result in sound public policy or effective strategy. We understand this. However, in the aftermath of a high-profile event, or as frustrations grow to a boiling point, a typical emotional response is, why don't the police do something? Indeed, it was interesting to hear Mayor McCallum's comments after a gang-related deadly shooting homicide, wherein he opined that the latest incident of deadly gun violence further emphasizes the need for the city of Surrey to have its own city police force. I'm not sure what he meant by that, given that virtually every urban community in Metro Vancouver, and indeed the country, regardless of policing structure, is experiencing similar events. Indeed. Vancouver last week had 1 shooting homicide and 1 person shot during a robbery. Enough of my pontificating, because we have a short amount of time here before we get to the questions and answers and provide you with some information that you would like to hear. But I'll provide you with some quick bullet point type informations and facts for you before the floor is opened up for questions. Notwithstanding the best efforts of municipal government, the Surrey RCMP detachment has been chronically under-resourced for decades. You can look at comparators if you like, but anytime you feel the need to add 50 extra resources, 35 extra resources, 100 extra resources, it's pretty clear that the community is playing catch-up. Given the population growth that Surrey is experiencing, I had down here 12 to 15,000 a year. Anita, you said 8 to 1,000 a year. To remain at 1 police officer for every 700 residents in the city would have to add approximately 15 new police officers every year, and additionally about another 5 support staff at least, to remain at 1 to 700. Vancouver is at 1 to 500, and you'll note that the City of Vancouver added 32 police officers in their budget this year, contrasted by Surrey not adding any. Surrey detachment does not take its direction on operational policing from Ottawa. And we can get back to the bar watch question later if somebody wants to ask that. Their strategic and operational plans are made in Surrey through consultation with the community and with the municipal government. I know this because I lived it for 8 years. The City of Surrey can have a police board if for the RCMP if it so chooses. This would be set up through the provincial government. We have 2 former Solicitors General here today that could confirm that fact. For the sake of discussion, Surrey RCMP has approximately 800 police officers. The total cost of their operation is $150 million, of which the city pays about $135 million. The remainder is made up by federal contribution. How long is this transition going to take? It's been proclaimed that it will take 2 years to do this. It's impossible to predict how long the transition to a new police service will take, given there's absolutely no data or information other than guesstimate as to how many police officers currently at Surrey, serving at Surrey detachment will remain at the detachment if it went to a new police service. For the sake of the discussion, though, we'll say it's 400. Half the members stay, half the members go. That means the city will have to acquire and recruit 400 police officers of varying degrees of service, skill, and expertise from other jurisdictions. This will take time to acquire and process, will impact the Justice Institute of BC, and will impact the efficiencies of police operations. Think how this plays out if a number turns out to be only 200 stay. To acquire 600 new police officers is not possible over a 2-year period, perhaps even over several years. I remind you that the province of BC has a final say in this transition, and I suspect they would not be inclined to sign off on any Surrey plan that puts other jurisdictions at risk or puts inordinate stress on the infrastructure of policing in the province. While there is pension portability between one municipal department to another municipal department, so for example, a Vancouver member could move to this new Surrey Police Service and port his or her pension with them, there is no pension portability for RCMP members moving to a municipal force. A federal pension can't move to a municipal environment. This will certainly impact on the decision on whether current members of the detachment move over or not. Last week, the mayor indicated on Global TV that there will be boots on the ground in less than 2 years. I'm not sure if he means that the transition will be completed by then, or does he mean that these boots on the ground will commence a process of transition? By contracting the RCMP, the City of Surrey is not liable for any civil action that may result as a result of police operations. The city's not liable, whereas Vancouver is liable for civil action against our police department. This is this absence of civil liability is a significant budget consideration. The RCMP has significant advantage in buying power through the size and scale of their organization of 30,000 members. It's kind of getting on to Mike's point again, but there has been no review of the current police model to determine where there may be gaps and how to address those gaps. There's been no public safety examination in the city and a determination how the police can best contribute to that plan and how they should be structured to contribute to that plan. There's an absence of any consultation at all that I can determine in terms of formal consultation with community groups, Surrey Board of Trade, Crown Council. 40% of the members of Surrey Detachment live in Surrey. They aren't traveling in from the valley. A large percentage of the members of Surrey Detachment will serve the majority of their service at Surrey Detachment. There was a problem in Richmond at that time where people, and a commitment was made to take the new police officers, they have to stay for 5 years before they'd be available for transfer out of the detachment. That number in Surrey right now is 7 years before members are leaving. They don't leave to never come back again. They go to get a breadth of experience and skill set and bring that back to the detachment and continue to serve the citizens of Surrey. The current space considerations at the detachment, this was an issue when I was the officer in charge of the detachment, and when I left it was like 670 members, now it's 850. They did buy some buy in terms of time in the through the old City Hall. They were able to take over that space. But the current space considerations at the detachment, as it continues to grow, and it will grow whether it's a police service, city police service, or whether it remains with the RCMP, will require addressing in the very near future. This could result in a capital cost of close to $80 million, regardless of who polices the city. These aforementioned points, and like we could talk about this for days and weeks. Perhaps that's a good idea. But they just begin to scratch the surface of some of the information, challenges, and impacts the city and its citizens should be alive to in contemplating and determining the future of policing for this city. In my view, this entire initiative has been entered into without any diligence, study, or consultation. The mayor indicates he has a mandate to effect this change. Personally, I don't agree. Firstly, it wasn't a single issue election. Secondly, he did not receive more than 50% of the vote. If the citizens of Surrey want to have their own police force, that's good. But go through an appropriate process to make that determination. Don't stand on conversations I've had anecdotally with members of the community. Those who may be ready for and who support a Surrey Police Department have no doubt arrived at their position without any type of specific information regarding the positives and negatives, and a costing outline, short-term and long-term, nor how this will make Surrey safer. Saying that Surrey has outgrown the RCMP should not be sufficient rationale and justification for this critical decision. Indeed, the mayor's own insight into the workings and effectiveness of the local detachment is stale and dated, not having had any insight into police administration and or operations since 2005. Had the aforementioned diligence and front-end examination and endorsement occurred, we wouldn't be here today. Potential costs are significant, and shouldn't always be about the money. What's that saying though? But $1 million here, $1 million there, pretty soon you start talking about real money. The city has indicated the transition cost should be $120 million. I haven't seen any detail on what that would include, but I suspect it does not include the ongoing additional costs that represent the loss of the 10% federal contribution. This year, the federal government contributed $50 million to safety in the city of Surrey through the contract. Throughout the transition, if this transition occurs, there will be considerable impact and risk associated to public safety and investigations. The phone never stops ringing at Surrey Detachment. It's a busy place. Ongoing investigations will have to be turned over to new investigators and units that have no acquaintance to the files and who will be distracted by having to learn new systems, policies, procedures, until that wheel gets round, that organizational culture that matures. The RCMP has served as a city police for the city of Surrey since 1951. Notwithstanding the challenges of resourcing, by any metric, they have provided quality service to this city. They have developed relationships and collaborations that make a difference. The Surrey School District, the RAP program, Sophie's Place, to name just a few. They have the expertise and experience to make a difference. They have the infrastructure and horsepower of a national and provincial police force at their disposal. I can personally attest to their individual and organizational commitment, their dedication, and the sacrifices they make and demonstrate on a daily basis. In my view, the citizens of Surrey should ask themselves the question, will the city of Surrey be safer if policed by their own police service? Is the formation of that service a higher priority for them than the impact this will have on an ongoing basis in the context of their city's requirements for other capital and operating budget demands? Would their city be better served by providing additional budget and/or resources to the existing detachment? I'll finish with an editorial comment. Pardon me. And those of you who know me know I'm very passionate about service to this community. My service in Surrey was the best 8 years of my career. Throughout this entire process, there's not been any comment or acknowledgement from the city regarding the impact that this initiative has had on the women and men, sworn officers, staff, volunteers at Surrey Detachment. They serve with passion and commitment. They continue that dedicated service in spite of this ongoing dialogue, and for that they deserve our respect and appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all four of you. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard some information, you've heard perspectives, and now we want to hear from you. So, go to the microphone, state your name. Remember to keep your remarks very brief to ensure full audience participation. We have a good 30 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. Bruce, you're first.
Thanks, Anita, and thanks to the panelists. I'm not sure that this is working, but
You're not used to speaking in a microphone. No, I'm not.
We can hear you.
You can hear me. So thanks all of you for coming out today. We really appreciate the various perspectives and where you're coming from on this issue. I think it comes down, from my perspective, it comes down to a cost-benefit analysis. There is going to be costs. There's going to be significant costs. If Richmond was 30 and we're 4 times the size of them, then we're looking at 120 in transition, and we're looking probably 15 to 20% operationally beyond that, plus whatever we have to pay for E-Division and so on. But my question is to the panel, in coming up with a report, and I'd ask Bob and Mike specifically who've done reports and done analysis on this type of thing before, when you're looking at setting up a model like this, when you're looking at a cost-benefit analysis, how can you determine what those benefits and what those outcomes are going to be versus the costs. So the City of Surrey is $1 billion a year budget, 600 operationally. So this is a very significant percentage of that. Protective services in the city is a very significant percentage of that. How can we determine what those outcomes are going to be and give the citizens any kind of assurances that we're going to end up with a safer community, because everybody wants a safe community. But Abbotsford last year had more gang-related homicides than Surrey did, much smaller community, a municipal police force, and so on. So it's not just the color of the badge that someone's wearing. How can we create a model that is going to create better policing? Thank you.
Thank you. You have microphones there that you could use.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. There's a lot of speculation around that. I can't say, like, the studies that I've done didn't deal with that specific question. You know, if you're going to get more benefit, a lot of it is based on experience, and a lot of this is subjective as well. I think you basically have to contrast the models and look what they have to offer. I do believe that the municipal model has been a lot more responsive, more flexible. I think there is ability to change the direction a lot more rapidly, and I know I certainly respect everything Fraser had to say in terms of making a fundamental change. That's something you can do within a municipal model that you cannot do so quickly in the RCMP model. Virtually every single day, the Vancouver Police Executive sits down and they have discussions about what the priorities are, and if there is a completely problem that comes up, they're able to deploy rapidly. So I don't think, like, I think I really appreciate the comments too around being so focused on gang violence and forgetting everything else, because it is a lot more than just gang violence. There's so much more to it, and mental health is a huge one, and homelessness and so on. But I guess the only other comment I'd make on that one is I guess I'm not doing a great job of answering it because it's a difficult question to answer. I think the point is that I would say that you can actually pick the best of all the existing models, and you can actually make something that builds on those, and I think there is a lot of opportunity for improvement, and I think there are some inherent advantages in the municipal model or the RCMP model. And I will say, though, that I should have said before, I have the utmost respect for the RCMP as well, and I think we have to be respectful for the members, all the members that are serving the community.
I'll quickly jump in on that. It is difficult to determine the cost-benefit analysis because you have to set some objectives, and I think so. Just to add to Rob's comments, one thing you have to do is to decide what are your public safety priorities, what are the major issues of concern, and then have a very realistic discussion about whether and to what extent those are achievable, resolvable, or addressable by police specifically. I think sometimes this conversation, we maybe overstate or overestimate the differences between different police organizations in Canada and the Lower Mainland in general. It's not like there's radical model differences between organizations. There's lots of integration and collaboration. So first half, a conversation about what are the objectives you're looking for, then a conversation about whether police are, the organization you want to be focusing on to address those objectives, and then figure out what the research evidence suggests in terms of process.
Dave.
Hi. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Dave Woods. I am a former city councillor, and I also spent 15 years in Surrey detachment. During that time, I worked directly with the chief when Terry Smith was the chief, and also Jamie Graham. And I also was a district commander under Fraser. So I do stand up here again, very jaded, and I'm somewhat passionate about this subject. I just want to set the record straight on a few things. First of all, Surrey detachment right at the moment has 6 different start times. So you will find that the shifting is based to peak policing. This is one thing that when we were on city council, we were very clear to the chief. We wanted to have peak policing. The other thing is with regards to political or political aspect, the city of Surrey unfortunately only had 33% of the population showed up for the election, and 15.5% of the population that were eligible voters voted for Mayor McCallum and his party. So I just want to set the record straight there with that. Also, I will tell you that when I worked with the chiefs, Mayor McCallum was the mayor before, and during that time, we got in 9 years, very few police officers. I think in 9 years, he added 50, and the city blew up. And so the last term, we had to add, I think, 135 police officers. We need a lot more, just for your information. Thank you very much.
Good morning, my name is James Stewart. I have no history in policing or experience with it, although I am a lawyer, if that counts. Just say initially, the reason why we're all here and the only driver for these decisions have got to be what's best for Surrey. I don't think we should fear change. Often change is necessary for evolution and improvement, but it has to be purposeful, it has to be considered. And it's so much more important in something so serious as this to do it well than it is to do it fast. And to use Mike's analogy of the bridge, I feel almost like we're in a process of building a bridge where we don't even know where the river is yet. So my question really, and maybe it's already been answered, is where is there any evidence that Surrey will be better off because of these changes? Any actual evidence that this is the case? I haven't seen any. I hear lots of people with their opinions and so on. And is the answer to this question really, we don't know? We're making the decision, we don't know if we're going to be better off or not. That at least would be a more honest question, and perhaps, as I say, you've already answered that question, that we feel that it's going to be better, but we don't know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Dave Hare. I served in Surrey as MLA from 2001 to 2013. I didn't have personal experience working with the police, but I have experience as a victim in Surrey. I'll go back to 1985 when Air India bomb that was planned for and made from here with RCMP watching the people who were making it, designing the bomb, and nothing happened to that case. That killed 331 people and 85 children. And other than one person, everybody walks free. And that was when I talked around the people around the world, they always say, what type of justice system do you have? You can't get conviction when police are watching the people who are making the bombs and all that. It was not something they didn't know about it. And there was Air India inquiry done on that they made recommendations on that, on the policing. And then I think sometimes maybe the policing, RCMP needs to be more like FBI and focusing on these bigger pictures than just in town. My second experience back in '88, not too far from Surrey here, my dad was shot in his newspaper office. He survived, but he was paralyzed. 4 bullets hit him. One person was convicted because our staff chased him, and one of the bystanders caught him. And there was other people involved. Nothing happened to those other people. Then 1998, at my dad's home in Guildford, he was assassinated 20 years ago. Even though police sort of knew, and again, Air India, even the commissioner, former deputy commissioner of the RCMP had said, yes, this was related to Air India, nothing happened. And I tried to call, when Fraser, you were there, you were very good. I want to say, if I called you, you all returned the call, you gave us information. I tried to find some information about my dad last November, before his 20th memorial service. I never received a call back from the police. One of the problems is when I go to the community, they said, we don't have enough police officers. I think it's not just the uniform as RCMP of Surrey Police. Surrey is larger than Vancouver, Richmond, and Burnaby combined area-wise. And population-wise, we are second largest. We don't have enough police persons in there to look after our system. So if you go to Surrey Police and you don't increase the number of police officers, nothing is going to get better, probably get worse. As you guys all talked about the learning curve and all that. So we need you to look at it, how to provide better system, better protection for the resident. In our justice system, have to look after the victim's rights, not just the criminal. When you talk about the privacy issues, too often they talk about privacy issues of the criminal, not the victims, not the general society. So that's just from my own experience. So I hope you keep that in mind, not just change the system, but actually take a look, keep in mind the victim. Many people are not reporting crime now because it's too difficult because police don't show up. That's I hear over and over again from many meetings in Cloverdale, in Surrey, and in Newton, in Wally area, and in different areas. And so when you look at the stats, I don't think they all is true, because I was at the meeting last week in Cloverdale. One of the shopping center manager was saying, yeah, we don't report it anymore. It's too much headache. Please, they're too busy. There aren't enough people to attend. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I can't answer your concerns directly, but when I was the chief here, people used to ask me, and in an attempt to help me out, say, geez, how many, you don't have enough police officers, how many, do you need more police? And I'd say, well, if you ask that of any police chief, you'd say yes, but you'd have to always recognize that it has to be balanced in terms of the community's ability to pay and other cost drivers in the city. But the other part to that response is, well, what kind of police service do you want? If you want no call too small, if you want bike patrols, if you want police officers walking the beat, there's a price to pay for that. If you want respond to call, go to the next call, never see police, then that's a less expensive model. So any police service, whether it's Vancouver, whether it's the RCMP, Delta, no call too small, it's predicated primarily on the capacity of the police officers and the ability of the executive to structure the police service in a manner that will make people feel more safe in the livability of their community.
Okay, Philip.
Just want to take the opportunity to thank Anita for the opportunity to have discussion, to have debate, and we should always be encouraging that process in Surrey because we will have better results through that. My name is Phil Begiri. I'm the Executive Director of the Newton Business Improvement Association. We've been around for 5 years. In that time, I get the pleasure of doing the Newton Integrated Services Team. I sit on the Newton Safety Unit, the Newton Community Response Unit. I meet monthly with the Newton Mobile Services Enforcement Team. And we just created a new team called the Newton Social Chronic Action Team. And, you know, all of these units are all basically community units that are out there on the street on a daily basis. And one of the great pleasures of success, you know, I know we always talk about crime stats as not being the best model of success, but in 2016, crime was down 6% in Surrey. In 2017, it was down 8%. In 2018, it was down 4%. And I can only imagine if we gave the RCMP the resources that they needed for these units that I talked about, that I meet weekly and monthly with, that the results that they could have in Newton. Kashid, you mentioned that we needed to be outcome-based, that we needed that results mattered. I love to see results increase. And, you know, I'm a small business owner, and my question, I guess, is if I'm the owner of a business and I don't give the resources to my staff, but I decide to fire them anyways, should I be reviewing myself or the institution that I'm giving a hard time to? So, thank you very much for your time.
Prem Vinning, a resident of Surrey. Anita, and thank you for putting this on, and gentlemen, thank you for being on the panel. I just want to make a couple of comments, and Mr. Heed mentioned in this regard that gang violence, crime, and policing was the major issue in this election. And, you know, they talked about politics get involved in a way of making proper decisions. Well, I don't think there's a better example than that we see in Surrey today. If this was a major issue that we all feel it was, then the first decision made by our mayor was not to hire any police officers. And, you know, I shake my head because there was an outcry that how we have lapsed behind. And Mr. Woods shed some light on something I wasn't aware of during the last 9 years when Mr. McCullen was the mayor. That, you know, how many resources did we put into policing? and the growth in the population, we've never kept up. And the gentleman before me mentioned something, you know, if he mentioned what I was thinking, if I'm running a business and then I expect, you know, to produce certain level of production each day to meet my commitment to my customers, but I don't have the resources to have the employees to make that product, how the hell am I ever going to deliver that to my customers? And Mr. McRae, I listened carefully to your some of the stats, and I know you don't speak on behalf of the RCMP, but I encourage you as a citizen that I have no problem in having a good, healthy, open discussion on what kind of police force we need. We should have that. But it should be an open and healthy and transparent discussion where we are engaged as a community and our views are listened to when we presented the proper facts, not distorted facts, not political facts, but proper facts. And I encourage you, sir, to stand up as a citizen and engage the community and let the community know the challenges that you face and the RCMP faces, because your officers are probably by law not allowed to speak publicly because you know, there's certain constraints around the positions they hold. But you as a citizen and the experience that you have, I think you owe it as a Surrey resident to engage the community, the Surrey Board of Trade, and let's have a proper, healthy discussion, because policing is about the 4 pillars of policing that I think need to be talked about: prevention, intervention, disruption, and enforcement. And all of these 4 pillars needs to be involved in. And my final comment is that this whole issue that's coming out now with this casino $2 billion that was laundered you know, it happened in Vancouver, happened in Richmond, happened in Burn, wherever it happened, and we've had different police forces in these municipalities. $2 billion, and from what I'm reading as a layman, we knew it was happening. Our police forces knew it was happening. And we got this opioid crisis where the money was made, and we've got hundreds of people killed because of opioid overdosing. And we lost fathers and brothers and sisters and children. And who's going to take responsibility for that? When are we going to have a proper, healthy, open discussion on that? I think it's time that we had a public inquiry and find out really what happened. So I encourage all of you gentlemen to engage the community, and let's put the facts on the table and let the people really know so we can make a proper decision and not a political decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, very passionate and very sincere. In the interest of full disclosure, I am not a Surrey resident. I only spent 8 years here as a
Well, you should be. It's the best city in the province.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I hadn't been around the city hall much since it's moved. But I was saying to Anita this morning, man, I was just so impressed with the changes up here in the city center and what it used to look like, and like this corner, I don't know if I'm pointing in the right direction, used to be all street level sex trade workers that were over there. And not that they aren't, those problems don't still exist in the city, but like, man, the city has really come a long way in terms of it's just wonderful what's occurred here in downtown Surrey. But notwithstanding the fact that I am not a resident of Surrey, I poured my heart and soul into this community for 8 years, not unlike many here. And I care about what happens in this community, which is why I'm here today. So thank you.
Cash? You have a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Vinian and I have had several conversations over the years with respect to this. He was one of the individuals, I think it was about 10 years ago, came to me with respect to the gang violence and the young Indo-Canadian. Points to a very, very important fact here is responsibility and accountability. And these are regional issues. When you talk about the opioid crisis we're facing right now, when you talk about the gang issue that we're facing right now, they don't stick to Surrey. They frequent Abbotsford, Vancouver, and all over. And you've heard me call out, and you'll hear continually from me, accountability, accountability, accountability. I can tell you there's not one person we can hold accountable to deal with any of these issues from a regional perspective. I know there's a lot of consultation back and forth, a lot of discussion back and forth. But again, until you bring in that responsibility, until you bring in that accountability and hold that person accountable to deal with it, there's, we're going to be fighting these issues. And I just want to hit on another point you brought forward, and it's the hiring of police officers. And I can tell you right now, there's not one police chief, and Fraser will agree, and Bob will agree, and I think Mike from his academic perspective will say, we're always saying we need more people, more people. I can tell you right now, you can hire 100 more officers for Surrey right now, and unless you change the way you do business, those members will just get absorbed in the system. So what I've advocated for is changing the system, because this is a very, very costly system, as you're starting to learn here and finding out, for those of you that didn't believe how expensive it is. But I'll tell you, unless you change the way you do business, you are not going to build, using your metaphor, the 4 pillars of what's required in policing. So I strongly agree that you start to reform the way you do business, not only in Surrey, but how we reform it BC-wide.
Really briefly.
Please. Cash, I agree with you 100%. And I've been doing some homework, and now's not the time to get into this, but my legal language might not be right, but I am told BC were the only province, besides the rest of the country, where the threshold of conviction is so high that we don't even take most of these cases to court, because the probability, I think is the word, the probability of conviction is so high that Crown Counsel will not take it to court. And there you go. And that is a problem for BC alone, because we won't even take to this court because we can't meet that criteria. But that criteria is not the same in Alberta or Ontario or Manitoba or New Brunswick. Why is it in BC? So it's a whole new discussion needs to happen, and people just don't know what really is going on, and that's just why it is important to have a transparent, open discussion where the community involved and knows the facts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alf Madsen, and my expertise is I'm just an ordinary citizen of Surrey. Been here since 1971. And been in Newton since 1978. And now we've finished the election and everybody's hair stopped burning. The only reason we're here today is because everybody's hair was burning about gang violence. You never heard about anything else. Gang violence. Well, I'm here to tell you, living in Newton since '78, driving bus out of Surrey Central Exchange for 16 years, I don't feel threatened. I'm not afraid to walk down the streets because I'm going to get shot. But there's more to it than just gang violence. We have to look at the whole overall picture. You just can't pick out one thing. And it must be frustrating for any police officer to keep arresting the same people over and over and over again, to see them coming out on a revolving door, right back into the same thing again, and it never gets any better. And I don't know why everybody knows this. So isn't it time now? Hot topic, RCMP or Municipal Police Force in Surrey. At the end of the day, there's going to be something out there. All I hope is whoever puts it out there makes it apples to apples. So if you want the RCMP to do certain things, you put it in their bloody contract. It's not rocket scientist. If I'm hiring somebody, this is how I want you to do it. If you don't do it this way, you don't get the contract. Simple. That part's easy. I got no problem with the RCMP. I think they've been understaffed, but I don't have a problem with municipal either. But I do have a problem with nothing being addressed to address the core issue. And the core issue is, if this panel spurred the mayors and a representative of all the police forces in the Lower Mainland to sit down with a working committee and come up with ways, laws that could be changed federally, provincially, how the court systems could deal with this stuff in a better fashion, how you could charge somebody dealing opiates with a murder charge and have it stick. I'm sure the heads, if they spent their time on that, could come up with some concrete things to go to the federal, provincial governments to get that part of it addressed. And the rest will sort itself out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir, panelists. My name is Roger Morrow. Some may remember my face, although I've got a lot less hair now. I was a spokesperson for the Surrey detachment for 5 years. I'd just like to address some of the things I'm sorry, gentlemen, I had to get up. We have a mental health unit that's very active in this detachment. I talked to one of the members on it yesterday. So we are tackling, I'm retired. I've got no direct affiliation for the Mounted Police. That lies with Fraser. I'm not speaking for the organization. But unfortunately, I teach jiu-jitsu at the detachment, so I get to talk to the members, and I'm relatively up to date about a lot of the programs. They have a very active mental health unit, and that is a seed of a lot of problems, whether it's drugs or break-ins, etc. Gangs has been brought up a number of times here. There is a gang unit working in the detachment. They're very active in your community, taking these people down. Something that I don't think came up directly, although indirectly, I guess, by our first guest. Yes, Ottawa is thousands of miles away. Thank God for that. Surrey Detachment is an autonomous detachment. They report to the mayor and council of the city. They report informationally to Ottawa. They're not governed by Ottawa. So in essence, you have an RCMP model doing a municipal contract with direct input from your councillors and the people here that live in this city. I served in Alberta, British Columbia, and overseas, 9 different postings altogether.